Hey there, friends! I'm Key from Travel Made Personal, and today I'm excited to share with you our exploration of the haunted Bellamy Bridge. Now, I say haunted, but before I get into all of that, I must admit that I am 100% a skeptic of the paranormal. While I very much want all these ghost stories to be true, my scientific brain says, nah, that's not likely. That being said, me bestie that I affectionately call Dusty is not so much a skeptic. So we enjoy exploring allegedly haunted places to try and prove one way or the other. The Bellamy Bridge was one such venture. Being that we were driving through the area anyway on our way up to Alabama, this was planned as our final stop on day one of our first Alabama road trip. Now, my son and I had previously attempted to visit the bridge on a road trip to Pensacola, Florida. We walked about half of the Heritage Trail in 2022, only to find out that it was flooded out and we could not access the other half to get to the bridge. Sure, we could have waded through the waist-deep waters combating leeches, snakes, and whatever else lurks in the swamplands of Florida, but we had our two pups with us and did not want to subject them to that mess any more than we wanted to do it ourselves. It would have been a whole thing. Hard pass. We did, however, read the history of the area on the signage that marks the entrance of the Bellamy Bridge Heritage Trail. We learned quite a bit more than we knew going into it. So, before I share the ghost stories surrounding this bridge, I'll share what we learned about the history of the bridge. The area around Bellamy Bridge in Jackson County, Florida has been an important crossing point on the Chipola River for over 325 years. The modern Bellamy Bridge Heritage Trail follows a historic route once used by Native Americans, early explorers, and settlers. In September 1686, Spanish explorer Marcos Delgado crossed the Chipola River near the present-day bridge site. His expedition, sent from Mission St. Louis in Tallahassee, consisted of 13 Spanish soldiers, a Chata interpreter, and 40 Appalachian Indian warriors. They were investigating reports of French activity near the Mississippi River. Delgado's journey took him through what is now Leon, Gadsden, and Jackson counties. After pausing at Mission San Carlos near Sneads, he moved northwest, passing Blue Springs and Balsell Spring before reaching the Chipola River in the Bellamy Bridge area. He described a swampy floodplain with a central stream 36 feet wide and 6 feet deep, which required a full day to cut through. Though his group eventually reached the Upper Creek Indian towns in Alabama, they never made it to the Mississippi. Delgado's expedition returned months later to Mission San Luis, reporting vast and difficult terrain. Despite this, the trail carved by Delgado became a permanent part of local geography. Modern roads, such as County Road 162 and Ruddock Road, trace portions of this historic route. Early maps documented it, and settlers relied on it as a key transportation path. Today, the Bellamy Bridge Heritage Trail preserves this legacy and provides interpretive signage at its endpoint. During the Second Spanish era, between 1783 and 1821, rising tensions between the United States and the Native American groups in Northwest Florida led to the First Seminole War. A significant clash occurred near the Bellamy Bridge area on March 13th and 14th of 1818. Chief Econ-Chattimico, meaning Red Ground King, aligned with the Seminole and Red Stick Creek warriors in opposition to the U.S. He had hidden his livestock along the west side of the Chipola River. In response, Brigadier General William McIntosh, leading a brigade of U.S. Allied Creek warriors, entered Florida to capture him. The troops crossed a massive swamp known as the Forks of the Creek, reportedly 6 miles wide, requiring them to swim through large portions. On March 13th, McIntosh's forces surrounded Econ-Chattimico's camp, but the chief had already escaped. Due to limited supplies, McIntosh dispatched Major Samuel Hawkins with a smaller strike force. Hawkins engaged Ikonchatamiko's warriors in a sharp battle, killing 10, though Ikonchatamiko escaped, surviving once again to continue resistance. So that's the history of the area. Now let's talk ghost stories. The legend of the ghost of Bellamy Bridge is one of Florida's most famous ghost stories. It centers on Elizabeth Jane Croom Bellamy, who died at the age of 18 and was buried near the bridge on May 11, 1837. A descendant of military leaders from the War of 1812 and the American Revolution, she was married to Dr. Samuel C. Bellamy. According to legend, Elizabeth's spirit haunts the Bellamy Bridge area, endlessly searching for her lost husband. Sightings of the so-called Lady of Bellamy Bridge date back to at least 1890, typically describing her as a misty woman in white or a dim blue light. Like most ghost stories, this one has many variations. The most popular version is that Elizabeth, or Betsy, was the daughter and granddaughter of heroes in the War of 1812 and the American Revolution. She fell in love with Dr. Samuel C. Bellamy of a prominent North Carolina family that had taken an interest in the new territory of Florida. Both the Bellamy and Croom households had many long discussions about relocating to Florida. The Bellamy Mansion, later called the Nichols Inn, was completed in May of 1837, just before Samuel and Betsy's wedding. The wedding allegedly took place in the Rose Garden at the mansion. It was followed by a magnificent reception with a string quartet and dancing well into the evening. Betsy excused herself, though, to the bridal suite, having been exhausted by the day's events. The legend tells of her sinking down into a soft cushioned chair next to the fireplace with a candelabra glowing from the table beside her. She drifted off into a deep, happy sleep when her gown somehow came into contact with the candelabra, or some say a spark from the fireplace set her dress on fire. By the time she woke up, her body was already engulfed in flames, and she let out a piercing shriek before the men extinguished the fire. Legend says she lived about another day before whispering to Samuel that she would love him always, and dying a short time later on the next day. She was laid to rest on a quiet hill on the plantation of Samuel's brother Edward. After her death, Samuel allegedly fell into alcoholism and depression. His brother Edward took control of Samuel's assets, and the two began to quarrel. Samuel sued Edward, and during that case, slit his own throat on December 28, 1853. As the years passed, staff and residents of the plantation began exchanging stories of seeing a mysterious woman in white. As I mentioned, there are several variations of this story, but that's the thick of the plot. Now the truth is, Samuel and Elizabeth Bellamy were actually real people from North Carolina. Samuel and his family were the wealthiest of the wealthy, and Elizabeth Jane Croom's family was also wealthy, as her father was Major General William Croom, who had commanded North Carolina troops during the War of 1812 and owned multiple plantations. While she's referred to as Betsy in the various ghost stories, Her father's will actually refers to her as Eliza. Eliza and Samuel did not wed in Florida. In fact, they were married at the Newington plantation near Kinston, North Carolina, according to family correspondence, marriage records, and newspaper archives. They wed on July 15, 1834, which was 3 years before the supposed wedding dress fire. Elizabeth did not die on her wedding night, and she didn't burn to death in a fire. The two lived together for another 2 years after their wedding. Elizabeth's brother, Brian Croom, was already well established in Gadsden County, Florida. Sisters Anne and Elizabeth began preparations for their families to join him in Florida. Samuel and his brother Edward had recently lost their brother Alexander to fever toward the end of 1834. Elizabeth gave birth to her and Samuel's son, Alexander, after his brother, in December of 1835. Samuel and Elizabeth purchased a large tract of land on Baker Creek about 3 miles northwest of Marianna, named Rock Cave Plantation. They moved to Florida in early 1836. However, the swamps of Baker Creek and the Chipola River were breeding grounds for mosquitoes. Fever and chills were common enemies for folks back in that day. On December 6, 1836, Hardy Brian Croom reported to his family that Samuel, Elizabeth, and baby Alexander were all 3 sick with fever. Elizabeth Jane Bellamy died of fever, not fire, on May 11, 1837, and was tragically followed by her 18-month-old son only 7 days later on the 18th. Her obituary appeared in the Tallahassee Floridian newspaper as well as others of that time. Her death was also written about in letters amongst her family. Samuel was obviously devastated by the loss of his wife and son, but he didn't descend into alcoholism and depression immediately. He got into financial trouble with creditors pressuring him and signed his assets over to his brother for $1 in an attempt to protect them from being seized. But his brother Edward refused to return his property, maybe due to the alcoholism, and Samuel did end up ending himself with a razor to the neck in 1853, 16 years after Eliza's death. His doctor reported he had been delirious for years prior to his death. The Bellamy's plantation eventually burned down in an accidental fire. The graves of Elizabeth and son Alexander were near the Bellamy Bridge and reportedly still are, but are inaccessible as they are on private property. Samuel is said to be in an unmarked grave in Chattahoochee somewhere. So where does this wedding dress fire story come from? Ironically, it comes from a novel written by Caroline Lee Hintz and published in 1853, titled Marcus Warland or the Long Moss Spring. Many believed the Long Moss Spring referred to Blue Springs near Marianna, but it wasn't. It was mostly based on the places and people she observed in Columbus, Georgia before she relocated to Marianna. I will post a link to this novel in the description below in case you're interested in reading it to compare the novel with the legend of Bellamy Bridge. In the meantime, here's a short passage from the novel about a young woman by the name of Cora who became so exhausted from dancing on her wedding night that she went upstairs to rest for a bit before rejoining the party. Turning away, she threw herself into a large easy chair in front of the fire, and in spite of the excited state of her feelings and the extreme want of sentiment evinced by the act, she fell asleep in her downy next. She had been up almost all the preceding night, on her feet all day, and had been dancing with such extraordinary enthusiasm that the soft cushion and gentle warmth of the room soothed her into instantaneous repose. How long she slept, she knew not. She was awakened by a sense of heat and suffocation, as if her lungs were turned to fire. Starting up, she found herself encircled by a blaze of light that seemed to emanate from her own body. Her light dress was one sheet of flame. The chair she left was enveloped in the same destroying element. Sound familiar? Okay, so there's much more to this story. I left out many details for the sake of time. I enjoy chasing down ghost stories and where they come from as much as I enjoy reading about the history of the lands we explore. I've pulled these details together from various sources and will link to some of them in the description below if you'd like to do your own research on the matter. Haunted or not, the Bellamy Bridge is full of interesting history, and I am ecstatic that Dusty and I were able to make it out to the bridge on our way to Alabama. Thankfully, some boardwalks were built at some point to help us over the flooded areas, though they can be a bit treacherous during the wet season in Florida. If you're into old, abandoned, haunted, or historic places at all, this is a great stop for you to go explore. If you have or do experience anything paranormal out there, I would absolutely love to hear about it, whether I believe you or not. So what do you think? Do you think the bridge is haunted? Let me know in the comments. Let's see how many skeptics versus believers we have out there. Since the bridge was our last stop of the first day, aside from the Alabama Welcome Center, Dusty and I drove into Dothan immediately after and checked into a hotel for the night. We had several more stops throughout this quick weekender trip, so next week I will share the first stop of our second day, which was the world's smallest city block. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Also, be sure to like and subscribe so you'll get notified as these videos get released. But for now, get out there and explore the world your way.